Welcome to the Scientific Adventures of Beard Man. We're going to be continuing on with questions 13 through 24 in the California Science Test, known as CAST. So sit back and enjoy and think carefully about each question. All right, let's go ahead and head on to question number 13. Students are given an assignment to design a simulation that will model effects of human activity on biodiversity in a particular town. A student decides to model changes in the biodiversity of a bird species caused by human activity in a forested park next to the school. The park is home to many native bird species. Near the park is a housing development and an industrial area. What three components should the students include in their simulation to best understand the effects of human activity on biodiversity? Size of the park is the first option. Second option, annual rainfall in the town. Third option, number of native bird species in the park. Fourth option, projected population growth in the town. And finally, number of native herbivore species in the park. Go ahead and choose three of these components now. All right, to understand this question, the first key thing that we have to notice is that we're designing a simulation that will model the effects of human activity on biodiversity. Okay, so we want to choose the three things that show how the human activity is affecting biodiversity. Well, size of the park, yeah, that seems reasonable. That size of the park would be part of like seeing how much the humans impact the biodiversity, how close are they to houses, and so on. Annual rainfall in the town. Humans don't cause the rainfall. I mean, climate change, they can affect it in general, but typically we just say I think we're looking at more immediate human impact. Number of native bird species, that's definitely going to affect be a telling thing of the biodiversity. Kind of is the biodiversity. Projected population growth of the town, that is going to definitely impact the human activity. Number of native herbivore species in the park. Okay, that's not human activity. So our three that we would choose would be size of the park, number of native bird species in the park, and projected population growth of the town. Move on to question 14. Scientists studied the extent of Arctic sea ice from 1978 to 2016. Observations from selected years are shown in the maps. The white areas show the extent of sea ice in November of the indicated year. The dark blue areas are ice-free ocean, and the green areas are continents in all the maps. Part A. Based on the Arctic sea ice images from 1978 to 2016, what is most likely going to occur from 2017 to 2027? A. Arctic sea ice will move to other parts of the ocean. B. Arctic sea ice will freeze and melt at the same rate. C. Arctic sea ice will continue to melt at an increasing rate. D. Arctic sea ice will continue to expand until it exceeds its 1974 extent. Go ahead and mark your answer now. So here we can see that in 1978, we can see that there's ice right in this area. We can see it's thicker up here, and then that starts to disappear as we move along here till here this whole region's gone. We can see other places where it's disappearing as well. So we can see that the ice is getting less and less as time goes on. We don't see any ice moving to other parts of the ocean. We don't see, if it's melting and freezing at the same rate, then we'd have the same ice in each picture. And then these two both say the ice will continue to meaning it's going to keep doing what it's doing. And so Arctic sea ice will continue to melt at an increasing rate. And as long as there's no other changes, that makes sense that it's going to keep doing what it's doing unless something changes. Now let's go on and read part B. It says, so part B, use the menus to complete the statement. Melting Arctic sea ice contributes to a positive feedback loop in the Arctic. As Arctic sea ice melts, more or less sunlight is reflected, and the temperature of the Arctic Ocean decreases or increases. Go ahead and mark your answers now. As you can see from the picture, the ice appears white, just like when we look at the mountains and we see snow on the mountains, it looks white. White means that all the colors of light are being reflected. So when the ice melts and it's no longer reflecting all the colors, that means that less sunlight is being reflected because it's not reflecting all the colors. It's only reflecting the blue or the green for the ocean, or the land might be reflecting brown or whatever, but it's not reflecting all the colors or it would look white. That means it's absorbing some of them. And that absorbed energy from absorbing that light is going to increase the temperature. All right, let's head on to question 15. The islets of Langerhans in the pancreas are made of a variety of cell types that release protein hormones. Among these cells are some that release insulin and others that release glycagon. These different cell types arose during embryonic development from identical stem cells that do not secrete either of these hormones. Complete the statement by selecting the correct words or phrases from the lists. The DNA sequence of the stem cells is most likely the same as or different from the DNA sequence of the hormone-secreting cells. The two types of hormone-secreting cells produce different hormones because they express different chromosomes, ribosomes, or genes. Go ahead and mark your answer now. So the DNA sequence of the stem cells is most likely the same as the DNA sequence of the hormone-secreting cells because they're coming from the same stem cells, and so the DNA wouldn't change. The two types of hormone-secreting cells produce different hormones because they express different genes. Genes are part of a chromosome, so it's not the whole chromosome, it's just different genes within that. Why'd that disappear? There you go. And that's because each of the different kinds of cells have a distinct sets of transcription regulators that either suppress or increase the transcription of the various genes. All right, moving on to question 16. So question 16. A student uses a computer simulation to investigate the effect of earthquakes on buildings. The simulation shows damage to buildings of similar construction except for their height. The simulation settings and the data collected from the simulation are shown. Type of soil, soft clay, magnitude of earthquake 8.0, and then we see the height of the building in floors and stories and the degree of damage. 1 and 3 story buildings, the damage is minimal. 5, 7, and 9 story buildings, the damage is severe. Then we get some levels with moderate damage, and then we get some heights of buildings with minimal damage at 17 and 19. Select terms from the menus to create a correct conclusion that is based on the simulation. A building of a height of 4, 8, or 12 floors could expect to receive a severe amount of damage. The severe damage to buildings is most likely due to the frequency of the building's vibrations, how close they are to other buildings, or the strength of the earthquake. Mark your answer now. So we can see here that the height of the building, 4 floors, might be minimal, it might be severe. We're not sure about that. What was our other options here? 8. 8 is right between 7 and 9, so it looks like we got severe here. So that's probably going to be our best guess. 12 seems to be kind of in this moderate range. So I think 8 is our best guess for severe. Then as far as the severe damage to buildings most likely due to, well, the strength of the earthquake, we had to base this, it says select terms from the menu, select terms from the menu to create a correct conclusion is based on the simulation. Well, we only have 1 magnitude of earthquake, so we couldn't base anything on the strength of the earthquake because we're only given 1 of them. So there's no change there. We're given no information in the simulation on how close they are to their buildings. So frequency of the building vibrations is the only reasonable choice that is based on the simulation. Let's talk about why that is. Frequency of the building vibrations. If you've ever pushed somebody on a swing, you know that based on the length of the swing, there's a certain amount of time it takes them to swing away from you and back towards you. And you have to push every time they're moving away with a certain frequency. Same thing with buildings. Based on their height and construction, they have a certain vibration that they naturally kind of swing from one side to the other. If the earthquake matches that, it'll keep reinforcing it, just like you reinforce the kid pushing on the swing. We say that matches the natural frequency of the object's motion. So the best choice is indeed the frequency of the building's vibrations. On to question 17. A comet is in an elliptical orbit around the sun. Select from the menus to best describe what happens at locations in the orbit where the comet is getting closer to the sun. As the comet approaches the sun, the gravitational force between the comet and the sun decreases, increases, or remains the same, and the comet speeds up, slows down, maintains the same speed. Mark your best answer now. So as the comet approaches the sun, the gravitational force between the comet and the sun, to figure out what happens to the gravitational force, we want to look at our equations here. And remember that our equation for universal gravitation is right here. And we can see that if we are closer to the sun, we're dividing by a smaller number. That's going to make the force bigger. You may have had this referred to as the inverse square law. So as the gravitational force between the sun and the comet increases as it approaches the sun, it's getting closer, there's going to be more force. Just like 2 magnets give you more force when they're closer, the sun or the comet and the earth will give you more force when they're closer. The magnetic force and the gravitational force are different, but they act the same way as in regards to distance. And the comet speeds up. You can remember that from Kepler's second law that says as you get closer to the center of the orbit, the speed has to increase. Or you could just think about the fact that if there's more force on it, it's going to have to move faster to avoid falling into the sun. And so since it stays in orbit and doesn't fall into the sun, it has to speed up as it gets closer. Look at number 18. We see here a student is asked to evaluate 2 different bumper designs that will be used on bumper cars at a local amusement park. The bumpers have the same mass and are each attached to a test car that undergoes a controlled collision with a wall. The student measures the average impact force on each bumper during the collision and the duration of each collision. The student's results are shown in the table. Design 1 has an average impact force of 980, while it has a duration of impact of 0.15 seconds. And Design 2 has an average impact force of 588 during a duration of impact of 0.25 seconds. Which design will provide better protection for a rider in a collision, and why? A. Design 1, because the change in momentum of the test car is smaller. B. Design 1, because the average impact force acting on the test car is larger for a shorter duration. Design 2, because the change in momentum of the test car is smaller. Design 2, because the average impact force acting on the test car is smaller for a longer duration. Make your choice now. Right, so if we take a look at the answer here, we see that the bumpers have the same mass and they undergo a controlled collision. They've been attached to a test car. So presumably they're attached to the same test car, I'm guessing. But regardless, it says it's controlled collision, which means all variables that we aren't testing, here are the variables we're testing, okay? All other variables must be held constant. So the mass and the velocity are held constant. That means that our change in momentum must be the same between the two cars, which means they both must have had the same impulse. So it shouldn't surprise us that the force, when we have a large force, we have a small time. And when we have a small time, we have a large force. So that is the last answer here, design 2, because the average impact force acting like test car is smaller. Once again, we see that here. Average test car force is smaller because it's happening for a longer duration. Move on to question number 19. In this one, we see that a town council of a small town in Southern California investigates the use of renewable sources of energy to generate electricity. They research both solar panels and wind turbines and collect the data in the table. Neither turbines nor solar panels release CO2 during their normal operation. However, CO2 is emitted during their manufacture. Then we see the table here with the energy consumed during manufacturing. We see 4 million and 23 million approximately. Then we see the total mass of carbon dioxide released during manufacturing, and we see 20,000 and 9 million. And we see the total energy generated in kilowatt hours each year, and we see 6 million and 6 million, both the same, 6.4 million. And annual maintenance costs are 140,000 for the wind turbines and 0 for the 40,000 solar panels. The council determines that it requires about 40,000 solar panels to produce the same amount of energy per year as one wind turbine produces per year. Assume a 20-year lifetime for both turbines and solar panels. Based on the table, complete these sentences by selecting the best phrases from the menus. If the main goal of the town is to reduce the carbon dioxide, CO2, released into the atmosphere, then the town's council should select wind turbines or solar panels because the amount of CO2 released during energy generation or released during manufacturing is lower. If the main goal of the town is to reduce maintenance costs, then the town council should select wind turbines or solar panels. Choose your 3 answers now. First, if our goal, sorry, I jumped around there on me. If our goal is to reduce the carbon dioxide released, then the town should select, well, we can see right here, where is it? Carbon dioxide released during manufacturing. Solar panels are 9 million. The wind turbine is 20,000. 9 million is clearly more than 20,000. So they should select the wind turbine. That way they'll only produce 20,000 kilograms of carbon dioxide as opposed to 9 million kilograms of carbon dioxide. Then it says because the amount of carbon dioxide released during energy generation or released during manufacture. We see that in 2 places here. We see first up here in this sentence, it says neither turbines nor solar panels release CO2 during their normal operation. Okay, so we know that's not during energy generation, that's the normal operation. So it must be during manufacturing. And we see right here that these numbers we were looking at are the amount released during manufacturing. So we choose that. Then we see our final question. If the main goal of the town is to reduce maintenance costs, then the town council should select, and this is just the ability to read the chart here. We can see that the wind turbines cost $140,000 in annual maintenance cost, whereas the solar panels cost $0. So if we want to save money, we would go with the one that costs $0, which is the solar panels. So we will choose solar panels. Let's head on to question number 20, the big 2-0. All right. Students in a class are designing an investigation to determine the effect running on a treadmill has on heart rate. They decide to have several students run for 20 minutes on a treadmill. Which two data sets must students collect in order to determine the effect exercise has on heart rate? Your choices: the student's age, the student's weight, the student's resting heart rate prior to exercising, the student's heart rate after running on the treadmill, the distance the student can run on the treadmill in 20 minutes. Select your answer or answers now. All right, so you can see here we're trying to determine the effect of exercise, so that's our independent variable, has on heart rate. That's our dependent variable. So everything else has to remain constant, and what we need to know is we need to know how much exercise was done or whether exercise was done and what the heart rate is. So student's age does not affect that, so we can eliminate that. Student's weight does not affect either one of those. Student's resting heart rate prior to exercising, yes, because we need to know what the heart rate is, and we need to know whether they were exercising at that point in time or not. The student's heart rate after running on the treadmill. Okay, so now we've got a second type of exercise. In other words, we are exercising as opposed to not exercising. And again, we have the heart rate. So those two are critical. And the distance the student can run on a treadmill in 20 minutes. Nope, there's nothing that we need to know about distance. So just those two, the third choice and the fourth choice. Maybe C and D, perhaps, if that's how that's been set up for you. All right, let's carry on to question 21. Students created a computer model of an ecosystem process to predict the density of different tree species in an area over 100 years. The graph shows the outcomes of the model for one of the tree species. We can see here the number of trees per hectare each year for 100 years. Complete the sentences by selecting from the menus. The process being modeled is most likely genetic succession, genetic drift, or coevolution following a disturbance. In 175 to in years 75 to 100, the population can best be described as having reached maximal growth, carrying capacity, or maximal density. Select your answers now. So let's take a look at our choices here. First, we can see that we have, oh, does that disappear when I click that? First, we can see that we have ecological succession. That is the process by which the mix of species and habitat in an area changes over time. That does sound pretty good because we're talking about how this particular kind of tree here changed over time. So let's take a look at the other ones, but that one's sounding pretty good. Genetic drift is the change in frequency of an existing gene variant in a population due to random chance. We don't see anything about a gene changing, we just see the amount of the tree that is there. So genetic drift does not seem applicable to the situation we're talking about. Coevolution is commonly defined as reciprocal evolutionary changes brought about by interactions between species. In other words, when one species evolves and changes, how does that impact another one? Okay, and we don't have two species here, so we're only looking at one one thing. So ecological succession, how that changes over time, matches our setup pretty perfectly. Our second choice here says in 75 to 100 years. So note that we're talking about this part of the graph over here, okay, can best be described as having reached maximal growth. Is the maximal growth, often called maximal growth rate, is the potential relative rate of increase under favorable growth conditions. Our maximal rate of growth seemed to be over in this region where we got the steepest line, the most change per year. So that's not in the 75 to 100 over here that we are supposed to be looking at. Carrying capacity is the maximum number of organisms that is of a species that an ecosystem can sustain, meaning they can keep having. We definitely had more back here, but we can see that it quickly decreased after that. But here it appears that we are sustaining that. So carrying capacity looks pretty good. But let's take a look at our last definition just to make sure. Maximal density is the highest density a substance can achieve under certain conditions. Well, it seems that under these conditions, we could attain almost 1,600 trees per hectare, but that was back in years 50 and 55. So in years 70 to 100, definitely our best choice is carrying capacity. Let's continue on to question 22. A railroad car with a mass of 90,000 kilograms is traveling along a straight horizontal track at a constant speed of 2 meters per second. The car collides with a second railroad car, also with a mass of 90,000 kilograms, that is initially at rest. The railroad cars stick together after the collision as shown in the figure. What is the speed of the two railroad cars immediately after the collision? A, 0.5 meters per second, B, 1 meter per second, C, 2 meters per second, D, 4 meters per second. Make your choice now. To solve this problem, we're going to use conservation momentum, the idea that the momentum before the collision has to equal the momentum after the collision. So let's go ahead and calculate that. If we click on formulas up here, we can see that momentum P, here we go, this is where I'm reading, momentum P equals mass times velocity. So now we just need to calculate how much momentum there is before the collision and how much is after the collision. Okay, let's write our equation here. P equals mv. So to calculate the momentum before the collision, the first car has 90,000 kg times 2 meters per second, which gives us 180,000 kilogram meters per second. The other car is at rest, so we're multiplying times the velocity of 0, so it doesn't have any momentum. After the collision, we have to have the same amount of momentum. P equals mv. So P still has to be 180,000, but now we have a different mass. So since we're trying to figure out the velocity after the collision, we can divide both sides by mass and get that V equals P over M. Well, P is 180,000 kilogram meters per second. And the mass, we now have two things that are 90,000 that are stuck together. So that means our total mass is 90,000 plus 90,000. So our total mass is 180,000 kilograms. So our kilograms cancel, our numbers cancel, and we're left with 1 meter per second. And that's our final answer. Let's carry on with question 23. In order to reduce air pollution, a particular community identifies 3 possible solutions. The community also proposes several criteria that the solutions must meet, including low cost and rapid impact. The 3 possible solutions are: Solution 1. Begin phasing in renewable sources of electricity generation, which would involve building new types of power plants. Solution 2. Encourage increased use of ride sharing. Solution 3. Encourage people to raise thermostat settings in the summer and lower them in the winter. For Part A, the community identified 3 constraints to help determine the best approach to reduce air pollution. For each of the 3 potential solutions, select the checkbox if the solution meets the constraint. The 3 constraints are long time to implement change. Constraint number 2 requires change in people's behavior. Constraint number 3 provides benefits in a short period of time. Select your answer to Part A now. Let's take a look at our 3 solutions. Solution number 1 talks about building entire new power plants. That definitely will take a long time to implement the change. It takes a long time to build anything, but power plants in particular might take a long time. Requires change in people's behavior. Probably not. There's no indication that these are questionable sources of energy generation. If we had more information, that's a possibility. Provides benefits in a short period of time? No, because they take a long time to implement. They will not provide benefits in a short period of time. Solution 2, encourage increased use of ride sharing. Well, it doesn't take too long to implement that, so that's not going to be a long time. But people do have to decide to ride share. They can't just encourage them. They have to actually ride share in order to make the change. But if they do, then it can provide benefits over a short period of time if they can get a lot of people to ride share quickly. Then for solution 3, encourage people to raise thermostat settings in the summer and lower them in the winter. In other words, they won't have to run the AC as much during the summer, and they won't have to run the heater as much during the winter. Again, we're trying to convince people to do it, so as long as people make the change quickly, it doesn't take a long time. They do have to make a change in their behavior, and it can provide benefits in the short term. Carry on with Part B of our question here. Part B, what additional information will be most helpful to the community to prioritize these approaches? A, projected reduction in air pollution. B, projected cost savings using renewable resources. C, the number of homes projected to be built in the next 10 years. D, the number of cars currently using electricity as a source and as an energy source. Well, to answer, go ahead and select your answer now before I give it away. All right. All right, now for the answer. Let's come back up here. It says, in order to reduce air pollution. So that's the key. That's the goal of this whole thing, is to reduce air pollution. Well, if the goal of the whole thing is to reduce air pollution, then it's certainly going to be good to know how much we expect the air pollution to reduce. So that is the correct answer. Let's move on to question number 24, our final question for this video. When scientists analyze the carbon cycle, photosynthesis and cellular respiration are often linked together because the same molecules represent the input and output for these 2 processes. Select each molecule listed in the grid as an input or output of photosynthesis or cellular respiration. We can see we have the same charts here for Part A and B. So we're going to do those together here. Go ahead and answer all of the inputs and outputs for photosynthesis and all the inputs and outputs for cellular respiration. Then we'll talk through them. Go ahead and choose your answers now. Right. As we take a look at this one, we remember that photosynthesis is what plants do. And we know that plants breathe in carbon dioxide, CO2. So they use that. And we know that we water plants. So they use water. And then plants breathe out oxygen. That's why it's nice to have a lot of plants around, because we breathe oxygen and it's nice that they produce it. They also produce sugars. That's why we grow crops, is because those sugars are one of the main things that we need. And that's part of the photosynthesis process. The reverse of that is cellular respiration. So we, as humans or animals, all animals, do cellular respiration. And so we breathe in oxygen and we eat food that has sugars made from the plants. And we produce in our muscles, when we do this, we produce carbon dioxide that we breathe out and water. So exactly the opposite. The photosynthesis uses the energy from the sun, and then we use the energy that was produced from the sun to turn everything back the other way. Thank you for learning with us here on the Scientific Adventures of Beardman. And if you enjoyed the video and learned a lot, click the like and subscribe. And if you are going to continue learning, the link here is to the playlist that will have the third and fourth videos available soon.